Laura woke me the next morning when she slipped out of bed just as the sky began to lighten. She grabbed the satin robe hanging on the back of the chair next to the bed, threw it over her naked body, and quietly walked out the door, heading down the corridor. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 5:48, showing their glowing dial. Quite early for a Sunday morning, I thought, but perhaps Laura needed some time alone before the conversation she surely knew I would initiate when I got up. I lay there for a long time, thinking. Perhaps it shouldn't have been surprising that Laura wanted a little more adventure in her sex life. When I met her, I knew Laura loved to have fun. Hell, her sexuality was one of the things that attracted me to her in the first place. Laura never hid her sexual past from me. In fact, I had passionate sex with her several times while she told me about her adventures. We accidentally discovered how arousing it is one evening when she chanced upon an ex-lover in the city center during lunch break. That night, as she lay cuddled after making love, she remembered a little about the old days and the fun right after college. I started asking her for details, and we ended up having wild sex while she excitedly described how she once did an impromptu sexy dance at a party for a $200 bet. Dancing naked in front of several dozen people, mostly men, turned her on so much that she grabbed one of them at random and dragged her into the bedroom, where they had crazy sex all night. It was a story she had repeated a couple of times over the years, and one that excited me even now as I imagined that night. My hand almost unconsciously reached towards my groin, and I slowly began to caress myself. The sunlight was now shining brightly through the cracks in the blinds, and I was thinking about Laura and my sex life. Although we didn't do it as often as we used to, we both tried to initiate sex regularly anywhere from once a week to almost daily, depending on our schedules. There was still a passion between us that couldn't be denied. Laura excited me like no one else before her. It still turned me on just watching her get dressed in our bedroom in the morning. All Laura and I seemed to need for sexual arousal was each other. We watched adult films and tried toys, but it was more out of curiosity than necessity. The toys, in particular, had not been used for a long time. I briefly wondered if the batteries still worked in them, and laughed that such a thought had even occurred to me. Every time we made love, Laura always felt pleasure, usually several, and she was always a willing and enthusiastic lover. I couldn't think of anything in our sex life that would hint at what Laura was missing. Perhaps she was looking not so much for sexual arousal as for arousal itself. There's no denying the excitement I always felt before having sex with someone for the first time. It's hard to ignore the thrill I feel when ordinary events take on sexual overtones. Yesterday's skinny dipping was one of those moments. No matter how many times I go skinny dipping, it will always be exciting. The same thing happened with the Consequences poker game a couple of weeks ago. I can't deny the arousal I get when I see any woman get naked in a public place, even my own wife, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't get aroused when I made out with Tammy that night. Realizing this to myself helped me understand Laura's need for arousal. But as I lay there, I wondered, would these feelings be enough for Laura and I to begin exploring a more open form of relationship? I remembered Cancun and how I felt when we were there. Memories of Laura dancing almost naked on her first night at the hotel. She looked incredibly sexy, wiggling her slender, naked body under the flashing lights reflecting off her shiny skin. But then I remembered my feelings when Laura left with her lover, and my stomach instantly sank. The thought of Laura having sex with someone else was unpleasant to me, and I quickly pushed it out of my mind. I had hoped that our experience in Cancun would remain an isolated incident, but now it seemed that Laura and I were moving in the same direction again. How far am I willing to go down this path? I thought. Do I even want to walk on it? I had no doubt how far Laura was willing to go. She could go all the way. The only real question is, does she need it? Was there something less extreme that could meet her needs? More importantly, will I be able to meet her halfway this time? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but I knew it was time to get them. I got out of bed and headed to the shower. I looked at my reflection in the shaving mirror for answers, but none came, just more knots in my stomach. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and just let the warm water flow over me for a few minutes. I was suddenly pulled out of my thoughts by the sound of the shower door opening. Laura walked inside with just a smile on her face. She turned on the faucet on her side of the shower, turned her back to the stream, and then turned to face me. "Good morning." I didn't answer, but took a small step towards my wife and took her hand. I pulled her into my arms to where two streams of water met. We stood there for a few minutes before Laura stepped back and looked at me. "Don't be angry with me, okay?" "Because of what?" I asked. "I came into your shower because I have to leave soon." "What?" "No," I objected almost angrily. "We need to talk," I began, but Laura put her finger to my lips. "I know we need to talk," Laura interrupted, "but I just got off the phone with Tammy. She's hysterical. Something happened between her and Dave after they got home last night. I'll meet her for brunch in 45 minutes. We'll talk when I get back. Why don't you go play golf?" "What's happened?" I asked with genuine concern for our friends. "Because of what happened last night." "Partly," Laura answered. "I couldn't find out any details. She cried so much, but it seems Dave cheated on her." "With whom?" I asked, trying to understand how Laura would react to this question. She didn't seem to be affected at all, however, and it left me even more confused as to what might have happened between her and Dave last night. "I don't know," Laura said without a hint of guile. "We didn't really have time to talk. I'm sure I'll find out everything when we chat." 30 minutes later, Laura was dressed and walking out the door. With a light kiss on the cheek, she promised that we would talk later. I watched as Laura drove out of our driveway and stopped at Tammy and Dave's house, which was just a few houses away. Tammy ran outside and quickly got into our car. I saw the girls quickly hug each other and Laura put the car into gear. The car started moving and they disappeared at the end of the street. I had about an hour before I was supposed to go golfing, so I decided to check in with Dave and see how he was doing. But as soon as I closed the door to our house, I saw Dave's car pulling out of his driveway. The top of the convertible was down and I shouted to him. "Dave!" He looked in my direction when he heard his name, but just waved his hand and quickly drove away. Damn, I thought, feeling more and more like a mushroom in the dark. I was starting to get tired of being kept in the dark, but I knew there was nothing I could do about it now, so I went to play golf. 5.5 hours, 4 beers, and a very respectable 78 strokes later, I returned home. When I entered the house, I found Laura and Tammy sitting in the living room with glasses of red wine in their hands. The first thing I heard was Tammy's exclamation. "What did you do?" Laura's answer was direct and without any embarrassment. "In return, I let Tom sleep with another woman." I assumed that they were talking about Laura and I's adventure in Cancun, which surprised me a little. Laura and I agreed that what happened in Cancun would stay in Cancun, and that included not telling our friends what happened. It was a secret I kept, and I assumed Laura did too. I was not angry, and since everything had already become known, I announced my presence by saying, in fact, it was not one woman, but 3. Both girls instantly turned to me. Laura's face looked like she had been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. I smiled at her and said silently, "Everything is fine." Tammy, on the other hand, began to stutter. "You let him sleep with 3 women?" she asked incredulously. Laura simply nodded. "Oh God, oh God," that was all Tammy could say. "It's not like I slept with them at the same time, Tammy." "Never more than 2 at a time," I joked. "La la la, I don't hear it," Tammy said, putting her fingers in her ears. "I can't believe it." I shrugged and poured myself a glass of wine. "It's true," I said, sitting down in the chair opposite the sofa on which the girls sat at opposite ends. "And you're okay with Laura sleeping with other men?" Tammy asked in an icy tone. "How could you?" "Honestly, Tammy, I wasn't okay with that. Just the thought makes me sick, still. But I knew that if I didn't give Laura the freedom to do what she needed to do to scratch her itch, she would probably do it behind my back. And since I really don't want to divorce her, I thought an adventure away from home would be the solution. And it worked. We've been doing great since we got back. even better than before. It was fun once, I guess, but I don't want to do it again. Laura frowned slightly at this comment, but I continued without noticing. It was supposed to be our secret, so I'm guessing that what happened between you and Dave last night is the reason why Laura broke our agreement. I let the word trust hang in the air for a bit before continuing. What's going on, Tammy? I saw Dave before, but he ran away from me like a scared rabbit. Tammy bit her lip, and I saw her eyes quickly fill with tears. Dave cheated on her, Laura answered for her, and Tammy nodded silently, although her eyes said more than words. With whom? I asked for the second time that day. The woman he used to work with, Tammy answered this time. She was transferred to the Chicago office, and they met after a going-away party the office threw for her. Apparently, she got drunk, and this prostitute told Dave how much she wanted him all those years they worked together, and Dave fell for it. Tammy was silent for a moment, as if reliving it all again, and now her face expressed anger. I have to kill this bastard, Tammy exclaimed, but just as quickly as she became angry, she began to cry again. I don't understand, I said slowly. This happened almost a year ago. I remember him talking about the party. Why is Dave telling you this now? Is this what triggered your behavior yesterday? No, Tammy muttered through her tears. I didn't know anything about this yesterday. Yesterday, it was more about Dave's obsession with Laura. I nodded, understanding what was going on. Ever since Laura started the dance the night we played Consequences poker, Dave has been talking about how sexy she is or how good she is in bed. It pissed me off like crazy, but you know Dave, he just shrugged it off. This pissed me off, and I asked him how he would react if I talked about you and how much I wanted you to have sex with me. And you know what that bastard said? No, I didn't know, so I just shook my head. He said it would turn him on, Tammy said, and then asked rhetorically, can you believe it? Yes, I thought I could believe it. And what did you tell him then? I told him to go to hell, and then I said that I don't care, let him go and have sex with Laura, because he won't get anything from me, Tammy replied with a new wave of anger. And that bastard actually took that as permission. What? I asked, quickly glancing at Laura, who laughed. No, stupid. He just thought I gave him the go-ahead. So what? I asked, not quite understanding where this was all leading. So, Laura chimed in, last night Dave came up to me in the kitchen and told me Tammy had given him permission to have sex with me. I just laughed and called him a liar, but he insisted that he was serious. The conversation got a little strange for a couple of minutes. I tried to make drinks, but he kept coming up from behind, trying to feel me up. So that's why you were so red when you came back outside, I remarked with a smug smile. Laura looked at me with one of those looks that speak louder than words. She seemed surprised that I noticed it. Did he get his way? I asked. Laura looked at Tammy before answering. Yes, she said quietly. What? Tammy exploded. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Don't know. You were already upset, and I didn't want to upset you even more. Sorry, I should have told you, Laura answered meekly. But why? Tammy asked. I'm just tired of pushing him away, Laura replied weakly. He wouldn't take no for an answer, and since I didn't want to make a scene, I just ignored him while I finished mixing the margaritas. It wasn't that important. Well, I thought, at least this mystery was solved, but there were still things that were not clear to me. I turned back to Tammy and asked, and you didn't know anything about this last night? Tammy shook her head to indicate no. So what came over you? I asked. It was quite an unusual proposal you made to me. Offer? What offer? Laura asked. Now it was Tammy's turn to look a little embarrassed. Laura looked between Tammy and me for a couple of moments, and since Tammy was in no hurry to answer, I answered myself. Tammy told me that I can have her body whenever I want. You didn't say that? Laura asked with a smile. She did, Tammy admitted. Were you serious? Laura asked with a smile. I don't know, Laura. Maybe. That's so unlike you, Tammy, I said. Why? I was still mad at Dave for talking about you over and over again, I guess, Tammy replied, nodding toward Laura, then looked at me and continued, When you said you wanted to see me naked, it instantly made me feel different. You did more for my self-esteem in 10 seconds than Dave did in months. At that moment, I wanted you precisely because of this. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the same way, Tammy. You were great yesterday. No, this is wrong. You are always beautiful. But yesterday, I saw you completely differently. Laura watched this exchange with a curious expression, and I realized that she was wondering where this was going. Thank you, Tammy said, smiling for the first time that evening. Turning to Laura, she added, Sorry, I should have told you that too. That's okay, Laura replied warmly, but it would help to understand everything. It doesn't make sense anyway, I remarked. I still don't understand why Dave told you he cheated Tammy. Why did he do this now? It happened right after we got home, Tammy explained. We barely got into the house when Dave asked when I was going to sleep with you. At first, I thought the bastard was a little jealous because of the dance I gave you, but instead he said it turned him on. He didn't show it then, but when we returned home, he was partial to me and kept asking me if the fact that I was undressing for you turned me on. I really didn't want to talk about it because I was a little confused about how I felt while dancing, but Dave kept me going. Finally, I got angry, told him to shut up, and that it would never happen, that it would ruin our marriage, and so on. I was already leaving along the corridor when he shouted that I could still do this because he himself had cheated on me. I don't think he even realized what he said until I came back and knocked him unconscious. Did you hit him? I asked incredulously. Bang, bang, Tammy responded, miming a punch, and then added, right on the nose. I can't say Dave didn't deserve it. He was such an idiot. Why did he tell Tammy he cheated on her? And why now? Idiot. Obviously, he was not thinking with his head on his shoulders. So what now? I asked Tammy. I don't know, she replied. This is exactly what Laura and I were discussing when you came in. I just don't think I can go down that route with Dave. Why does he want me to sleep with you or anyone else? It doesn't make sense to me. I think I understand why he feels this way, Tammy. This happens to varying degrees, but I think many men are looking for confirmation that they have chosen the right partner. On some level, I'm glad that Dave finds Laura attractive. This makes her even more attractive in my eyes. I don't want her to be with Dave, but the thought of another man wanting her turns me on. I think Dave is just acting on similar feelings. So you think it's natural? Tammy asked thoughtfully. Desire, yes, I think it's very natural, but not action. There's one more thing, Tammy, Laura chimed in, and Tammy and I both turned to her. It's just sex. What do you mean? Tammy asked. Well, if you and Tim go into the bedroom right now and do this, will you still love Dave later? Will you still go home to your husband? I wouldn't do that, but yes, I would still go home to my husband. That's what I mean, Laura concluded. When Tim and I were in Cancun, we both had sex with other people, but we never had any doubts that we would come home together. This was not true, I thought. I had a lot of doubts at the time, but I think I understood what Laura was trying to say, so I didn't interrupt her. I love Tim, Laura continued, and sex with Tim is amazing because I love him, but love is not a necessary ingredient for sex. Sometimes sex is good simply because it's sex. That's how we're all built. Tammy thought for a moment. So you think I should sleep with Tim? I didn't say that, but you can if you want. Just think about what Dave is asking of you. It's not the end of the world. Tommy and I both sat back, somewhat taken aback by what Laura had just suggested. Listen, Laura said, catching our reaction, you and I have been friends for a long time, Tommy. I know that before we met, we led completely different lives. You and Dave started dating very young, unlike Tim and I, so I probably view sex differently than you do. You've seen me play those sex games we sometimes play. You need to do the same. I'm not saying you should do things you're not comfortable with, but I think you need to be more open to your sexuality. Your marriage will thank you for it. Yesterday was a good start. Tommy sighed and looked down, as if agreeing with what Laura said. But this bastard still betrayed me. That's true, Laura agreed. This is true. Tommy raised her head after a few seconds of thought. There was determination in her eyes as she looked straight at me and stated, "I want revenge." Tommy went home shortly after announcing her intentions to get revenge, but only after making Laura and I promise to help her. "What are you going to do?" I asked Tommy, swallowing. She didn't know, but she said she would need our help once she had a plan ready. "I can count on you, right?" was her last question to Laura and me, each separately, before leaving. We both assured her that we would help, although I had my doubts. He may have been a scoundrel, but Dave was still my friend and had been for a long time before he met Tommy. I knew for sure that I would not sleep with Tommy just so she could get revenge on her husband. If it came to that, my answer was already ready. After locking the door, I heard Laura comment behind me. It was, of course, interesting. "Don't say it," I agreed. "This is not at all how I expected this day to go." "Oh, that's how you thought it would go." "Oh, I thought, the ice under me has become very thin. I decided that if I started acting up, I would probably say something wrong, so I simply told the truth. Well, I thought one of two things could happen. After what happened last night and the fact that you put it off until today, I thought maybe you were the one Dave cheated with." I paused to appreciate how destructive the bomb I had thrown was. And Laura asked in an even but cold tone, "I also thought that you and I would talk about what happened in Cancun last year," I added, sighed, and waited. "You were right about one thing," Laura said after several seconds of silence, without any hint of anger in her voice. "Dave?" I asked with a lump in my throat. "No." "Ah, that's all I could squeeze out. It seems that the lump in my throat has only grown larger." "Tim," Laura began, "I won't cheat on you. I could have had a dozen opportunities in the last year with half a dozen men you know nothing about. If I had still been in college, I probably would have had whirlwind romances with most of them. I was attracted and very seduced. But I'm not a student anymore. I'm happily married to you. Moreover," Laura continued, "Dave is the last person I would have an affair with for many reasons, but you and Tommy are the main ones. But you and Dave always." I started, but Laura interrupted me. "Dave and I have chemistry. We flirt and play. I knew he wanted me from the moment we met. He imagined me naked under my clothes when you introduced us, in fact." "Is it true?" I asked, essentially not understanding what was going on. It was a pathetic sight. Laura laughed. "That's why I had so much fun teasing and tormenting him all these years. Funny, I never thought that he was jealous of me." "Oh, he's not jealous. He understands, as do I, that he and I would not last even a week as a couple. I would have killed him earlier," Laura joked and grinned to herself. "He just wants me, and you." "Well," Laura thought about it, "I know it would be fun to sleep with him. The problem is that I'm not sure I'm ready to give up the advantage I have over him. He's problematic enough as it is. I can't even imagine what it would be like to deal with him, knowing that he could brag about sleeping with me. It would change our whole dynamic. At this point, the only way to get any kind of cooperation from him would be to risk losing his chance to have sex with me. I kept him hooked for so long that it became part of our relationship." "Would you have done this if Tommy asked you? You know, she can." "I don't know," Laura answered after a moment of thought. "Maybe. She'll probably ask the same of you." "I'm not going to sleep with Dave. Let Tommy forget about it," I said with a smile. "Silly. You know what I mean. What will you do?" Laura asked and, pausing for emphasis, raised one eyebrow. "HM? I don't know, Laura. I've always been attached to Tommy. You know it. It won't be a big burden for me to make love to her. That's exactly what it will be, love. I don't seek casual sex with her. The dynamic of my relationship with Tommy is different from the one you have with Dave. If we have sex, it will be a very intimate experience." "You are right. Emotions will be involved. I never told you, but Tommy admitted that she had a crush on you a couple of years ago." "Is it true? Why didn't you tell me?" "I promised not to tell her. Besides, you had no need to know. Your head is already too big," Laura said and smiled dazzlingly. "I love you too, bitch," I joked in response. Seriously, what are we going to do? We promised to help her, and I wouldn't want to break my word. I don't want to sleep with Tommy, just like I don't want you to sleep with Dave. I don't want to ruin our relationship by trying to fix it, and I'm not sure it will help at all. You're probably right that it won't help their relationship, but I think revenge is exactly what Tommy needs. From everything she told me today, she would never leave Dave. Knowing Tommy, I understand that if she doesn't feel like she is on an equal footing with him, it will torment her. Their relationship won't stand a chance until she feels like the playing field is level. So what should we do? I asked. Let's just wait and see what she comes up with. Agree? I nodded. In the meantime, we can deal with the elephant. With which elephant? I asked, not understanding what my wife was talking about. With the elephant that stands in the middle of the room and that no one wants to talk about, Cancun. We really need to talk, Laura said seriously. I know. We probably should have talked since we got back from Mexico, but everything was going so well that over time it didn't seem like it was necessary. I thought you were happy, I said. I'm happy, Laura answered quickly. I'm very happy. If there's one thing I learned in Cancun, it's how much I love you. She put her arms around my neck and kissed me deeply for a few seconds, and then, looking at me, she said, I'm so lucky to have you. Then what's wrong? There's a part of me that's not so happy, and I'm not sure you can change that part of me, Laura answered carefully. This is a part of me that you've never really seen. And what part of you is this? I asked, now very intrigued by where Laura was leading. My inner prostitute, Laura whispered. Your inner prostitute? What the hell does that mean? I asked, knowing full well what she meant. Are you saying that I don't satisfy you? If that's the case, then you did a great job of deceiving me last night, I said angrily. No, Tim, Laura snapped. That's not what I want to say. I think our sex life is wonderful. You are the most caring and sensitive partner I could wish for. I don't want to change anything about our sexual chemistry. Then I don't understand, I almost screamed. Explain to me. The part of me that's not happy is the part I don't want to show you. The relationship she represents is not the relationship I want to have with you. This part of me wants to be dominated and exploited, but I don't want my husband to do it. I don't want it to be someone I love. Let it be someone for whom I feel contempt, like Dave. Dave? That's what he wants, Tim. Dave wants to have me sexually, and there's a part of me that wants him to get what he wants. Your inner prostitute, I suggested. My inner prostitute, Laura agreed. I could own you, I offered hopefully. You can't, Tim. You idolize me, and I wouldn't want it any other way. Then what should we do? I thought out loud. I don't know, Tim. This is not something I specifically planned. I've just been thinking about it more often lately. Spending the night naked in front of everyone a few weeks ago lit a fire inside me that hasn't gone out yet. Dave touching me yesterday definitely didn't help, and the amazing sex you and I had last night only added fuel to that fire. I cannot accept the role of a cuckold Laura. I'm not going to be married to someone else's woman of easy virtue. This won't happen again. Cancun was a one-off experience for me. You hurt me. I know. You should know how sorry I am. I was selfish, Laura admitted to both herself and me. There's hardly a day that goes by that I'm not grateful that you found a way to forgive me for the way I treated you that week. I probably don't deserve you. You deserve it, I said, pulling Laura closer. Remember, Cancun was my idea. I was ready to accept the consequences of everything that happened there. I went on that trip to keep you, not to lose you, Laura. I love you too much to lose you. You won't lose me, Laura whispered, hugging me tighter. You won't lose me. We stood there for a while, and I gently stroked Laura's hair. At some point, she pulled back a little and looked at me. I saw thoughts forming in her head that she wanted to express. Will you do one thing for me? Laura finally asked. Don't know. It depends on what you ask for, I answered evasively. What do you want me to do? I just want you to keep an open mind as this whole thing between Dave and Tammy plays out. Why? There is some excitement in the fact that I don't know what she will ask of us. It fuels my inner energy. It makes me feel alive. Don't kill it now by saying no. Let me enjoy this for a few days, okay? It was like letting a child play with matches, but I agreed, okay, I'll try to be open. Thank you, Laura said and sealed her words with a kiss. It came as no surprise to anyone that over the next few days Laura began to walk with a special zest. She and Tammy talked on the phone several times during the week, but I still couldn't figure out what they were up to. Every time I asked Laura about this, she just smiled and answered, "You'll soon find out." Laura also became unusually passionate, and we had sex every day. One night, I decided to mix things up a little and add aggression to our intimate relationship. At first, Laura clearly liked it, and inspired by her reaction, I increased the pressure even more. I started making love to her more roughly than usual and asked, "Are you my woman of easy virtue?" As soon as the word "woman of easy virtue" left my lips, I immediately regretted it. "Tim, stop it!" Laura shouted sharply and pushed me away. "I don't want this from you. Stop it." "But," I began. "Stop it. If I wanted that, I could sleep with the garbage man tomorrow morning. Love me like you always do, please?" she asked, looking up at me. There were tears in her eyes. "Please?" "Sorry," I said. "I just thought that." "I know what you were thinking, but don't. This is not what I want from you. This is not the role I want to play in our relationship. You understand?" I nodded, indicating that I understood, although in fact I didn't quite understand. I was struggling with the realization that there was a part of my wife that I couldn't satisfy. I returned to our usual gentle style as she asked, and continued making love to her. It was awkward at first, but then Laura started responding to me the way she always did, and the sex was just as great as usual. We lay in each other's arms for a long time that night, not speaking, until Laura reached out and brushed the hair off my forehead. "You are such a good person," she whispered quietly. Only when I heard her voice did I realize that Laura was crying. I pulled my dear wife closer to me and hugged her without saying anything. I fell asleep while she sobbed quietly on my chest. For the next day or two, there was some reserve between Laura and me. That elephant in the room that no one wanted to talk about always seemed to be between us. And so, without any preamble, Laura announced that we were going to Dave and Tammy's for dinner on Saturday night, after my usual round of golf with Dave. "Dave hasn't even spoken to me since this all happened, Laura. What makes you think he would agree to play golf with me on Saturday?" "He'll be there, or Tammy will rip his head off," Laura said self-confidently. "Call him this evening and make arrangements." "So what's the plan?" "You'll see." That was the only answer I received. After dinner, having put away the dishes, I went to my office. I booked my tea time online and then picked up the phone to call Dave. It was one of the shortest and strangest conversations of my life. "Tammy, this is Tim." "Just a second," she replied. A few seconds later, I heard Dave's voice. "Hello? Dave?" "Yes, Tim?" "Yes. Golf on Saturday." "Okay. 9:08 at Lakes Field." "Okay. Okay. Bye. Bye." I hung up and just looked at the phone for a while. I knew Dave for so many years, and even when we had disagreements, we were always able to communicate well. I didn't want to leave everything as it was and dialed his number again. "Hello? Dave?" "Yes. On Saturday, I will destroy you on this field." "Yeah, of course, Dream. Don't forget to bring more money. All the money I need will be in your wallet." "As you say." I froze for a moment before asking, "Are you okay?" "It could have been better," he answered. "Tammy has been killing me all week." "You deserve it," I noticed. "I know. See you on Saturday." Cold, I hung up the phone, feeling much better than I had 2 minutes ago. I hope Dave does too. On Saturday morning, I walked into the driving range and noticed Dave hitting balls against the fence. I watched his blow as I approached from behind. He hit his usual weak fade. You'll never start hitting normally if you keep coming from above, I said instead of greeting. Dave looked up from the ball he was preparing for and grinned. What do you even know, idiot? I know a slice when I see one. How are you? Nice to see you. It was a hard week at home. It's so cold around Tammy that it's a wonder I haven't gotten frostbite yet. How's your nose? Not broken, but not forgotten yet, Dave replied, carefully rubbing his nose. She hit me hard. I didn't even have time to notice. What were you thinking? I exclaimed in bewilderment. How did you manage to admit to Tammy that you were cheating on him? You don't see this woman anymore, do you? No, it was a one-time thing. Just a moment of weakness, you know. Yes, probably. So why tell Tammy? I didn't want to. It just burst out in a fit of anger. She's such a Puritan sometimes. I just wanted her to relax a little. Relaxed, I exclaimed. Dave, last weekend she went skinny dipping with us for the first time in her life, and gave me a dance you wouldn't believe. Give her a break already. What do you mean, wouldn't believe it? Dave asked with interest. Forget it, I waved it off. Just trust me, Tammy is not a Puritan. I think you're putting so much pressure on her that she's resisting. Do you think so? Dave asked, clearly trying to figure it out. Yes, I think so. So what do the girls have planned for today? I don't know, he answered. It was a secret for a whole week. Tammy and I hardly spoke. I only know that we can't show ourselves there until 7 in the evening. Hey, maybe we can play 36 holes, I happily suggested. We played 27 holes and had a couple of beers in the clubhouse after the game. Dave was treating me because he beat me by $30, which hasn't happened in a long time. I was leading by $15 going into the last hole when Dave suggested we double down. I agreed and immediately sent my shot into the water, allowing Dave to win easily. Today, however, I didn't care. After all the drama of the past week, I was glad to get away for a little while. But reality struck home when I looked at the clock. It was already 6:35. We have to go, I said. We're already late. After 45 minutes, I dropped Dave off at his house and headed home to shower and change. Laura was not at home, but as I walked into the bathroom, I noticed that she had carefully placed clothes on the bed for me. I quickly showered, shaved off my stubble, and just as I started to get dressed, I realized that Laura had chosen for me the silk sleep shorts she had bought me a few years ago. Accompanying them was a pale yellow silk shirt, which I usually wore untucked, which is what I did today. At 7:45, I walked into Dave and Tammy's backyard, where I found Laura and Dave sitting at a table on the deck. Dave was drinking beer, and Laura had a glass of wine in front of her. Finally, Laura joked when she saw me. We already wanted to send a rescue team. Laura stood up to kiss me, and I wasn't surprised to see what she was wearing, a blue satin pajama set. The top was undone a little more than usual, and I could see a lacy white bra that occasionally flashes as she moves. I knew from experience that the panties in this set were thongs, which I assumed she was still wearing. You look great, I said half-jokingly, moving away to look at my wife after a short kiss. Thank you. Laura smiled and made a quick turn in place. Her tight little ass was covered in satin, which confirmed my suspicions about the thong. Why don't you come in for a beer? Tammy is in the kitchen. I waved to Dave and noticed that he was wearing some kind of old-fashioned housecoat and silk pajama pants. Welcome to the pajama party. He raised his beer. I went inside, but Tammy wasn't there. Having opened the refrigerator, I bent over to get a beer when I suddenly heard a voice behind me. Great ass. I turned around and saw Tammy standing in a striking pose in the kitchen doorway. My mouth literally dropped open. She looked amazing. Like Laura, Tammy was in lingerie, but that's where the similarities ended. My wife looked modest compared to Tammy, who was wearing a black lace bodysuit that hugged her body like a second skin. This bodysuit was almost completely transparent, and her breasts were clearly visible. The only thing that was not visible was her private parts. It was a look I never expected to see on Tammy. Wow, that's all I could say, looking at her in shock. I'm so glad you came, Tammy said, approaching me. I've been waiting for this moment for several days, maybe even years. She came close to me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and, pressing her body against mine, kissed me passionately, penetrating her tongue into my mouth. I was a little taken aback by her actions, as I didn't expect it to start so early, but I quickly pulled myself together, hugged her waist, and returned her kiss. After a few hot seconds, Tammy looked up and, looking me straight in the eyes, asked, "Will you keep your promise?" "Tammy, I don't want to." I started, but she interrupted me. "Relax, Tim. I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to do. Just play with me, okay?" "Okay," I agreed, although I wondered what I was getting myself into. She took my hand and led me back to the terrace, where Laura and Dave were still sitting at the table. Dave was looking at Laura as we walked out, but when he turned his head in our direction, he was visibly stunned to see what his wife was wearing. "Tammy, why are you?" He began to stutter. "Dave," Tammy interrupted sharply. "Shut your mouth." He did just that. Tammy waited until she was sure Dave wouldn't say anything more, and then, putting her hands on her hips, she looked her husband in the eyes and said, "If you say one word about what I'm wearing, I'll go back to the house right now, change into my old sweatpants, and you can forget about your fantasies forever." "Understood?" Dave nodded silently. "You wanted it, and now you got it. I hope you can handle it, because if you don't, I'll leave. If you want me to remain your wife, you will do exactly what I say. If you ever deviate from my instructions, I will leave so quickly that your head will spin. If you don't believe me, go look in my car. Everything I need is already collected there. Do you understand me?" Tammy asked with fury in her eyes. It was a look I'd only seen her give once or twice before, but I knew Dave always tried to avoid it. "Do you understand?" I saw Dave swallow before answering. "Yes." "Great," Tammy said coldly. "Then go and get Laura and me another glass of wine. We're thirsty. When you get back, just sit down and behave yourself. Clear?" Dave nodded and, as if with his tail between his legs, went into the house to get wine for the girls. As the door closed behind him, Tammy's face broke into a wide smile and she exclaimed, "That was fun." Once the girls got their wine and Dave sat down again, things went back to normal for a while. At first he was quiet, but feeling that it was still possible to talk, he began to participate in the conversation with us, only not as noisily as usual. The conversation was surprisingly normal, except for the new elephant in the room. Tammy decided to bring the next round of drinks herself. When she stood up, she lingered at the table longer than necessary, giving all three of them an excellent view of her body. Then, swaying her hips, she went into the house. "I'm so excited I'm about to explode," Dave blurted out as soon as the door closed behind Tammy. Laura and I burst out laughing. "I don't think that's going to change any time soon, buddy," I chuckled, realizing that things were the same with me. Tammy returned with a tray containing our drinks. She had just put the last glass on the table when the doorbell rang. "I wonder who it could be," she said with feigned surprise. Dave tried to get up, but Tammy put her hand on his chest and sat him back down. Looking him straight in the eye, she said, "I'll open it." After Tammy left, I looked at Laura, trying to figure out what was going on, but she just shrugged. It was clear that she no more understood what Tammy was up to than I did. Dave looked completely confused. A moment later, Tammy returned, leading a young guy in his early 20s who was holding a couple of boxes of pizza. To say he was stunned would be an understatement. He looked scared to death. "The pizza has arrived," Tammy announced cheerfully, as if not noticing that her naked body was exposed in front of the guy. "Pay him, honey," she asked Dave. While Dave paid the guy, Tammy took the pizza and placed the boxes in front of Laura and me. Then, turning to her husband and the delivery man, she snatched several bills from Dave's hands, estimated the amount, and thrust a whole wad of money into the guy's hands. "This should cover most of it," she said, pushing him toward the gate, "and this should cover the rest." Then, without further ado, she grabbed the guy's face with her hands and kissed him on the lips. The kiss lasted longer than I expected, and I noticed a bulge begin to grow in the guy's pants, which Tammy gently stroked when she pulled away. They exchanged a few words that we didn't hear and started kissing again, deeper and more passionately. This time, the guy's hands explored Tammy's body, especially lingering on her breasts. Although I expected something unusual from Tammy this evening, this was already beyond all limits. I think Dave felt the same way because when Tammy finally closed the gate behind the departing delivery man, he exhaled loudly as if he had been holding his breath all this time. Dave leaned forward to say something, but Laura put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Don't even think about saying anything," she hissed. When he obediently leaned back, Laura removed her hand and relaxed herself. Tammy returned to the table and looked down at her husband with her hands on her hips. I noticed a blush on her chest. She was clearly excited. "Well," she asked, "do you have anything to say?" Dave just shook his head. "Fine. So we understand each other," Tammy said. Walking up to Dave, she put her hand in his groin. "You seem to be enjoying yourself too," she said with a hint of contempt. "Great." Then, as if switching gears, Tammy turned to Laura and me, smiled, and said, "Let's eat, otherwise the pizza will get cold." Dinner turned out to be strange. Dave was silent. Laura and I were reserved. Tammy, on the other hand, chatted about everything under the sun, especially sexual topics. She talked about her college adventures, the secrets from her and Dave's bedroom, and even some secrets that Dave didn't know about, including the fact that she had a sexual attraction to me. I looked at Dave to see what his reaction was, but by that time he was so overwhelmed that he didn't seem to be aware of anything, and given Tammy's circumstances, it was probably for the best. Along the way, Laura asked Tammy a leading question about her exploits, which Tammy happily answered in detail. Through all of this, I found that I had completely changed my mind about this woman I thought I knew. She was nowhere near the prude Dave thought she was, and she was becoming a sexier creature to me by the minute. We were only halfway through her stories and dinner when I realized I wanted to be one of the men Tammy shared some of these adventures with. She had affairs with several members of her swim team, both men and women, and the year before spring break, she placed second in a wet t-shirt competition. Apparently, there were photos online if you knew where to look for them, and it looks like she did a lot more than just wet her shirt to win, and much more. Tammy told us about her first time having sex. The picture Tammy painted was not of the low-sexed woman Dave sometimes portrayed her as, but of a highly sexual being who hid the desires of her youth under the trappings of a wife and professional woman. If anything, I think Tammy was afraid to let her sex cat out of the bag, and I was starting to think that Dave might get a lot more than he bargained for tonight if she really let her inhibitions go like she seemed to be doing. I wondered as I watched and listened to her describe the first pleasure she had ever given. Was this the real Tammy? Was the Tammy I came to know living a lie? Perhaps it was both. As it began to cool down, we moved into the living room, where the wine continued to flow. I drank steadily, but not excessively. Dave hardly drank anything. But both Tammy and Laura got very drunk, especially Tammy. I've never seen her as drunk as she is now. She was far from out of control, but the alcohol was definitely taking its toll on her. "Dance with me," Tammy said, pulling me into the middle of the living room. The soft music playing softly wasn't the best dance music, but Tammy didn't seem to care. She simply wrapped her arms around my neck and began rocking back and forth, pressing her body tightly against mine. "I'm so horny," she whispered in my ear. We danced like this for a while. No groping, no grabs, just two people swaying to the music. Tammy felt very good in my arms. Every time we turned to face where Dave was sitting, he just looked at us. I couldn't understand what was on his mind. Inevitably, the feeling of this beautiful woman rubbing her body against mine had the intended effect. Tammy must have felt it on her stomach because she reached between us and wrapped her fist around it. "What do we have here?" she asked shyly. I just shrugged, feeling a little awkward that Tammy was holding me like that with her husband just a few feet away. "I think Tim likes me, Laura," Tammy called over her shoulder. "Perhaps you should come and dance with me, in case he gets dizzy from all the blood pouring in here." Laura stood up and interrupted me. "Wear something nicer for the dance," she advised me. I found a CD labeled Workout 2 and put it in the player. Immediately, techno pop started playing from the speakers, and the girls got really excited about dancing with each other. Tammy must have wanted to catch up with Laura because she reached over and began undoing the buttons on Laura's pajama top. A few seconds later, Laura's top was thrown towards us boys, and Laura continued to dance in her bra. Half the song had passed, and Laura had already gotten out of her panties, leaving only her lace underwear on. I looked at Dave, and he seemed more tense now than when I danced with Tammy. I suspected that at the moment he was living two fantasies simultaneously. Not such a punishment, I thought. My attention turned back to the girls as Tammy reached behind her neck and undid the clasp on her sheer jumpsuit. She took off the top part of her clothes up to her hips while still wearing a top. She ran her hands along her sides, making her movements expressive and playful, and then continued her dance. In a burst of excitement, Tammy increased the energy of the dance she was doing with Laura. If at the beginning they danced separately, then soon their movements became more synchronized and close. It started with small gestures, such as a hand on the shoulder or waist, but soon they began to move together, increasing the dynamics of the dance. Their movements were rhythmic and full of energy. They actively used the space, as if creating their own show. Dave and I couldn't take our eyes off them, but the girls seemed completely engrossed in their dance, as if they had forgotten we were there. When the song they were dancing to ended, Tammy took Laura's hand and pulled her in front of Dave. "Do you like what you see, Dave?" Tammy asked her husband, referring to Laura. Dave nodded. "Do you want her?" Dave nodded again. Tammy reached behind Laura, undid the hooks on her bra, and, without even looking at Laura for permission, pulled the bra off, exposing Laura's breasts to her husband. "What about now?" Tammy asked again, and Dave agreed again, without saying a word. It was at this point that I began to notice changes in Laura. Somehow, over the course of the evening, she began to defer to Tammy. There was a slight difference in the way she carried herself, as well as the way she seemed to seek Tammy's approval, but I think I saw a glimpse of Laura's inner prostitute coming out. I don't know if she and Tammy planned this in advance or not, but I knew that Laura enjoyed being with Dave this way. "Laura," Tammy said sharply, getting all of our attention. "You will do everything in your power to seduce Dave, but you will not be able to touch him. You understand?" Laura looked over her shoulder at Tammy, who was standing slightly to the side behind her, and nodded in agreement. Tammy turned back to her husband. "Dave, if you move even a millimeter in Laura's direction, everything will be over between us. From now on, no matter what happens, unless I tell you to do something, you do nothing. Just sit in your chair and watch. Do you understand?" Dave didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at his wife, whose eyes seemed to be boring right through him. "Great, Laura, you know what I told you." "Yes, Tammy," Laura answered quietly. At this point, I finally realized that Tammy knew about Laura's secret desires and was perhaps somehow living out her own dominatrix fantasy through Laura. Regardless, she now had both Dave and Laura on an emotional leash. Laura looked at me before making any movement towards Dave. "I love you," she said silently with her lips. A request for permission was read in her eyes. Tammy's words about not having any physical contact echoed in my head, and I nodded slightly, deciding that I could accept what would happen under these conditions. Laura walked closer and stopped right in front of Dave. Tammy came and sat next to me. She put one leg on top of mine and leaned back, smiling relaxedly. Her movement was so natural and effortless that I felt as if everything around me had slowed down. Tammy leaned toward me, getting close enough that I could feel her breath on my ear, and she whispered, "This is going to be interesting." Laura began to dance to the music, standing in front of Dave in her light outfit. She moved smoothly and confidently, her body flowing to the beat of the melody, as if every movement was thought out in advance and brought to perfection. Her hands smoothly slid over her body, and her gaze, directed somewhere into the distance, gradually closed, as if the music was carrying her into her own world. There was something mesmerizing about this complete surrender to the moment. Dave, sitting opposite, did not take his eyes off her, completely immersed in her dance. There was admiration in his gaze, and it seemed that nothing else in the world existed for him. I was so caught up in what was happening that for a moment I forgot Tammy was there. Laura and Dave were like the main characters in this scene, and everything around them became unimportant. But soon I felt a slight movement nearby and turned my head towards Tammy. She looked at me with warmth and a soft smile on her face. I also smiled back, feeling how a thin thread of mutual understanding had formed between us. She gently took my hand and placed it on her knee, pressing lightly, as if to say that we are also part of this moment. We sat next to each other, looking at our spouses, enjoying the atmosphere and the fact that this evening gave us all something special. We were silent, but this silence was filled with something important, a feeling of closeness and general joy from what was happening. We continued to watch as Laura twirled to the beat of the melody, and Dave, fascinated, followed her every move. Every gesture, every look, everything happened as if in slow motion, allowing us to enjoy every detail. It was a moment when each of us felt that we were part of something larger, something that is difficult to describe in words, but easy to feel in the heart. Tammy and I exchanged glances and smiled at each other again. We knew this moment would stay with us for a long time. Laura turned her back to Dave and began to watch us with a strange expression on her face. After a few moments, Tammy motioned with her head to continue. Complying, Laura resumed her dance, giving Dave the opportunity to get an up-close look at her toned buttocks while still looking at Tammy and me. Laura hooked her fingers into the waistband of her underwear and pulled them down, letting them fall to the floor before carefully stepping out of them. I was surprised to see that Laura had completely changed her appearance. This was clearly a new decision for her, and I felt that she wanted to show everyone her confidence and courage. Laura stood before us with a sense of strength and ease, and it was obvious that she was comfortable in her own skin. She turned to face Dave, giving him the opportunity to see a new side of her. Her gaze was full of calm and confidence, as if she was inviting him to see her as she is, without any barriers or boundaries. It was more than just appearance, it was an act of inner freedom and self-acceptance. Dave looked at her with genuine interest and admiration, not looking away from her and trying not to miss a single detail of this moment. Then Laura took a couple of steps back, as if creating space around her and attracting our attention. She carefully spread her legs, as if emphasizing her resilience and self-confidence. Then she leaned forward a little, a gesture that was both revealing and powerful. Laura clearly showed that she was comfortable in this state and was not afraid to show her emotions and thoughts. Tammy and I couldn't help but exchange glances, feeling like we were witnessing something special. It seemed that Laura was overcoming not only physical boundaries, but also internal ones, showing us all an example of freedom and acceptance of one's individuality. She carefully ran her hand along her legs. Her gestures were smooth and natural, as if she was enjoying the moment and wanted to highlight every feature of her. Her movements were full of confidence, and I felt how it affected the atmosphere around me. It was clear that Laura was not just showing her appearance, she was sharing her feelings and experiences. It was a kind of performance filled with courage and openness, and we were all part of this moment, watching her actions. She turned again, giving Dave the opportunity to continue watching her. Laura seemed to know she had everyone's attention and used the moment to highlight her confidence and her ability to be open. Dave, as expected, watched without taking his eyes off, his attention completely riveted on what was happening. There was no embarrassment in this moment, only admiration and sincere interest. Everything that happened was an opportunity for us to see Laura's strength and confidence, her ability to be real and free. She was not afraid to show herself as she was, and this, in turn, aroused respect and admiration from everyone who was around. We couldn't help but feel like we were witnessing something meaningful, real, and inspiring. After a while, Laura raised her head and looked directly at Tammy and me again. Tammy still had her hand in my shorts, but my hand had already reached under her thong. Now I touched her skin, and my hand slowly slid over her body. Laura watched us intently for a few seconds, and then gave in to the waves of pleasure that seemed to cover her body. She groaned, and after a moment she dropped to her knees to catch her breath. Meanwhile, Tammy called out to Laura, It's Tim's turn. Laura crawled towards me on all fours. When she reached me, she pushed Tammy away and then kissed me passionately, pushing her tongue deep into my mouth. I felt my own passion rising within me, and I pressed Laura to my chest. Laura's hands cupped my face and pushed me back so that I ended up on the couch, slightly turned around. My wife's sexual hunger seemed to take over her, and her kisses became more and more insistent. I returned them to her in the same form. At that moment, I felt that Laura wanted me to completely relax and trust what was happening. She quietly whispered to me, "Relax, just kiss me and enjoy this moment." It was then that it became clear to me that my role in this situation was much broader than I expected. I was needed here not for myself, but for Laura. This moment belonged to her, and my task was to give her the support and closeness that she so needed now. As this understanding solidified in my mind, I stopped thinking about the specific details of what was happening and focused on how I felt about the woman I was holding in my arms. I felt Tammy move and then saw her lightly touch Laura on the shoulder. This must have been a prearranged signal because Laura moved closer, taking a position next to me. I felt that the atmosphere had changed and realized that this would be an important moment in which we all participated, each in our own way. Laura and Tammy continued their movement as if reading each other's thoughts. It was like some kind of pre-rehearsed dance, and I just happened to be part of what was happening. At some point, Tammy turned her back to me, and I felt her touching me, and it became clear that she wanted to show something to Dave, who was watching everything that was happening. Tammy moved, gradually increasing her pace. I didn't see her face, but I knew that she was completely immersed in this moment, and this was something special for her. I continued to be a part of the scene, concentrating on supporting it in the process. Laura was the first to express her emotions, and her whole body literally radiated a feeling of completion and satisfaction. Almost simultaneously, I felt my tension culminate as I became part of this general energy. Soon Tammy joined, but unlike Laura, she was more reserved and quiet, which added some special atmosphere to everything that was happening. After that, Tammy stood up, and I felt all the tension of the moment gradually dissipate. This was the moment when we all realized that everything was over, and every detail of what was happening was part of a larger, common process that united us all. She looked at Laura and me and said, "Thank you." Before we could say a response, Dave was dragging her down the hallway and Tammy waved goodbye. Laughing, I turned to Laura and said, "I think we're going out tonight." We gathered our clothes quickly and quietly. I started to feel a little weird about the whole thing. Although I had to admit that it was a very erotic experience, the evening didn't necessarily go the way I wanted. Laura sensed my discomfort, and as we walked home, she asked if I was okay. "I think so," I told her. Turning me into a faceless person helped a lot. "You caught that, didn't you?" In the end, it was pretty smart. "It was the only thing that could work, Tim. I knew you wouldn't just have sex with Tammy if asked. Dave would most likely never forgive you if you did that. I didn't want you to get emotionally involved with Tammy either. That was probably the biggest risk I took, but I think it worked out well." "And you?" I asked. "Your inner prostitute seems to be having fun too." "Wow, aren't we observant tonight?" But yeah, I told Tammy a little bit about what was going on with me, and she seemed to really like the idea of me and Dave having sexual command. Incorporating this into our plan has become quite easy. "So, what time was scheduled for that evening?" I asked, hoping to finally get an answer. "Most, but not all. I didn't know anything about the pizza guy." "Wasn't it hot?" remarked Laura, and I had to agree. Also, I had a pretty good idea of how the rest of the evening would go, even though Tammy didn't know if she was actually going to have sex with you. There was a very good chance that she would have agreed to make Dave watch her pleasure. I'm glad she got through it. In a way, me too. However, I don't see how this was supposed to be Dave's punishment. He got everything he wanted. "That's not true," my wife replied smugly. "He didn't understand me. I need to tease him and show him everything he will miss. Now he will want me more than ever." "So what about you?" I asked. Is your inner prostitute feeling more fulfilled? Laura looked at me and grinned. Maybe. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.